From the heart of Africa, Burkina Faso shines anew.
The Africa spoke. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African stories.
They didn't bomb a terrorist camp. They didn't strike a rebel convoy. The U.S. military launched a precision missile strike on Burkina Faso. But here's the catch. There were no soldiers, no weapons, no war, just a river, and 150 tons of fish. Wait, what? Last week, satellites captured footage of a strange detonation over the Mohun River in Burkina Faso. Within hours, rumors exploded online. Is this a new war front? Did the U.S. just cross another line? What are they hiding? But while the world was busy guessing, one question kept surfacing louder than the rest. Why would the world's most powerful military use million-dollar missiles to attack fish? Here's what most people missed while doom scrolling. That strike? It wasn't a missile. It was the release of over 150 tons of live fish, tilapia, carp, catfish, into the rivers of Burkina Faso. No explosion, no war, just hundreds of boats, guarded by armed soldiers, dumping thousands of shimmering fish into muddy waters, with global cameras watching. This wasn't random. It was meticulously planned by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old military leader of Burkina Faso, in what he called an ecological offensive against hunger. And it cost millions. Let that sink in. In a country where many children go to bed hungry, the government spent millions of dollars to dump fish into rivers. Reactions were instantaneous. Locals cheered, some cried, many were confused. And critics, both inside and outside the country, called it insane. This is a PR stunt, said one French analyst, a distraction from real issues. Others asked, why not spend that money on hospitals, schools, or roads? The outrage grew louder when news broke that the fish were flown in, some from as far as Egypt and Vietnam. We're not talking about a few crates. We're talking air-freighted, climate-controlled containers of live fish. To some in the West, it looked absurd. A failing African government throwing fish into rivers while poverty and extremism rise. But if you're American, let me ask you this. What if I told you this fish strike was actually smarter than a trillion-dollar war? Would you laugh or would you listen? I want to know what you think. Was this a waste of taxpayer money or a genius move no one saw coming? Drop your take in the comments, and if you're curious about how this bizarre fish story just might reshape geopolitics, stay with me. So why? Why would a military-led government dump over 150 tons of fish into rivers that are already half-dried, half-polluted, and mostly forgotten? Turns out this wasn't a one-off stunt. It was part of a national program called Operation River Rebirth, quietly drafted months earlier under Traoré's transitional cabinet. Here's what we know. Burkina Faso has been facing severe protein shortages for years. Over 30% of children under 5 suffer from chronic malnutrition, especially in rural zones. Imported frozen fish from Ivory Coast and Ghana are expensive and often controlled by middlemen connected to foreign corporations. And due to drought and illegal mining, local fish stocks had collapsed in most river systems. Basically, the rivers were dead. And when the rivers die, so do villages that depend on them. So instead of importing more frozen bags of tilapia packed in plastic from European warehouses, Traoré made a decision. Reset the river ecosystems from scratch. He called it shock therapy by nature. According to internal memos leaked last month, this plan involved mass restocking of native fish species, combined with eco-military patrols, and even tax incentives for riverside communities to build basic aqua farms. They even proposed tying the fish release to school lunch programs, ensuring smoked fish would go straight to classrooms once populations stabilized. And here's where things get more interesting. This wasn't just about food. Traoré's team understood something deeper. In a country plagued by extremist violence and internal displacement, food security equals political stability. They weren't just feeding stomachs, they were feeding loyalty. From a U.S. standpoint, this might sound unusual. We tend to separate food aid, defense, and infrastructure into neat little boxes. But in places like Burkina Faso, those boxes don't exist. When rivers dry, young men join militias. When food prices spike, governments collapse. When ecosystems fail, so does national cohesion. So maybe, just maybe, Traoré wasn't throwing fish into the water. Maybe he was throwing a lifeline. If you were running a nation on the brink, would you gamble everything on fish? Or would you keep buying frozen aid forever? Let me know in the comments. And if you're starting to think this guy might be playing 4D chess, you're not alone. Keep watching. This wasn't just an ecological project, it was a power move. And once you start seeing it that way, everything changes. Traoré wasn't just restocking rivers. He was reprogramming a nation's mindset, one fish at a time. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most politicians avoid. Hunger is the foundation of politics. Feed people and you buy time. Feed them sustainably and you build loyalty. Make them dependent and you stay trapped in a cycle of foreign aid and silent resentment. That's exactly the loop Burkina Faso has been stuck in for decades. And this wasn't random fish either. Each species was chosen strategically. Tilapia, fast-growing, low-maintenance, perfect for local diets. Catfish, tolerant to muddy, oxygen-poor water. Carp, helps rebalance riverbed ecosystems. Traoré's plan was to reset the aquatic food chain, not just for humans, but for birds, crocodiles, even soil bacteria. Because if the rivers heal, the farmland downstream heals too. Now pause and think about this for a second. This isn't about food anymore. This is about sovereignty. He's using fish to undermine foreign supply chains, cutting off European frozen fish exports, reducing reliance on West African middlemen, and telling the world, we don't need to beg, we can breed. Now let's look at it from an American angle. Imagine a governor in Mississippi or Arizona suddenly declaring, we're restocking the Colorado River with millions of fish to fight inflation. You'd think they were nuts, right? But imagine if it worked. Imagine if local families started eating cheaper, fresher, local fish. Imagine if rivers became job hubs, aqua farms popped up, schools got fish-based lunches, and the state cut down on federal dependency. Suddenly, that governor would look like a genius. Now zoom back out. That's exactly what Traoré is attempting. Only on a national and maybe even continental scale. Let's be honest. If this had been announced by a Nordic country, global media would have called it visionary climate resilience. So why is it being mocked when it's coming out of West Africa? If you agree that we need to stop measuring bold ideas through a Western lens, drop a comment. Let's talk. Then something unexpected happened. The rivers started coming back to life. Within just 3 weeks of the fish release, local fishermen began reporting catches they hadn't seen in years. Fishermen in Boucle du Mouhun were pulling in nets overflowing with tilapia. Some even had to turn back early because their boats couldn't carry more weight. Children who once skipped school for food were now attending class regularly, because for the first time, schools were receiving smoked fish deliveries tied to the program. Even the black market started to shift. Fish that had to be smuggled in through Ghana and Ivory Coast was now being replaced by local trade. And it didn't stop at humans. Wildlife, especially migratory birds and crocodiles, began returning to the rivers. Local farmers noticed their irrigation water had more nutrients, likely from fish waste. It wasn't just fish, it was an entire ecosystem reboot. And Traoré wasn't done. Just days after the first success reports, his office announced a new phase: microloans for riverside cooperatives, low-tech hatcheries made from mud, bamboo, and scrap metal. And a bold policy: villagers would be granted ownership over sections of river, on one condition: they protect and sustain it. Let me pause here and speak directly to Americans watching. Can you imagine being told that a stretch of river near your home belongs to your community, if you care for it? That's not just eco-policy, that's nation-building. Because once people believe the river is theirs, they don't wait for government grants. They patrol it, they defend it, they invest emotionally. It's the same principle behind neighborhood watches or community gardens in the US, but scaled to entire bioregions. Now multiply that across 13 provinces, and now imagine other nations watching. And they did. Within weeks, Envoys from Mali, Togo, Ghana, even Nigeria visited Burkina Faso to study the program. Local press started calling it fish diplomacy. One headline read, "From bullets to bass, how fish became a weapon of peace." Suddenly, Traoré wasn't just a transitional president. He was being viewed as a continental innovator. If your country could fix food security without debt, without Western aid, and without foreign control, would you support it? If so, hit like, or better yet, share this video, because someone in your network needs to hear that real change doesn't always come in a box labeled Made in the West. What happened after the fish release? Quiet, no celebration, no parade, just rivers, fish, and people watching to see what comes next. It didn't take long for the narrative to split. Government officials said the early signs were promising. Catches were up. Fish markets in Bobo Dioulasso and Koudougou reported 20 to 30% price drops in under 2 months. Local co-ops formed. Some schools, especially in the Cascades region, swapped imported canned tuna for fresh smoked tilapia in lunch programs. But at the same time, international trade reps began raising concerns behind closed doors. One EU briefing warned about the destabilizing potential of large-scale local aquaculture if not aligned with existing trade frameworks. Translation? They're worried Burkina Faso might stop buying. The pressure didn't stay quiet. An NGO operating in Ouagadougou suddenly suspended its food distribution program, citing duplication of efforts. One report claimed fish mortality was spiking due to poor water quality, but data from the Agriculture Ministry showed the opposite, over 80% survival rate in monitored zones. Conflicting stories, conflicting interests. Traoré didn't respond directly. But 3 weeks later, he pushed through a new rural river rights law, giving local communities legal authority to manage and protect aquatic zones, something no previous government had attempted. And here's what that means. Villages now have the right to defend their own food systems. That's not charity. That's jurisdiction. It's a shift from receiving aid to writing policy. That doesn't sit well with everyone. Whether this model holds or collapses depends on 3 things. Whether the rivers can stay clean, whether the locals can stay organized, and whether foreign pushback stays subtle or turns direct. Because if this works, it sets a precedent, not just for Burkina Faso, but for any country trying to exit the dependency loop. And that is exactly why everyone's watching. The effects aren't just domestic anymore, they're regional, and they're starting to get strategic. In mid-June, the governments of Niger, Mali, and Togo sent delegations to observe the program. Unofficial talks have already begun on what's being called a West African freshwater corridor. The proposal? Joint fish stocking across shared river systems, coordinated river law enforcement, and shared export infrastructure for inland fish trade. It's not signed. But it's being discussed, and that changes things. If multiple countries adopt this model, it breaks the current import cycle controlled by Europe and parts of Asia. It also shifts power away from coastal ports, where most frozen goods currently enter the region. That affects shipping companies, customs brokers, and foreign fisheries. It also affects politics. A leaked policy brief from an international consultancy warned that river-based aquaculture in the Sahel may introduce unpredictable local power centers if not harmonized with trade partners. In plain terms, letting poor countries control their own fish might disrupt the international supply game. Back inside Burkina Faso, the government is scaling. New hatcheries are being built along the Natsinan and Nakambe rivers. They're using low-tech modular designs that cost under 15,000 to replicate. Each can produce up to 2 million fry per cycle, more than enough to restock several rural zones. In some areas, village security groups traditionally tasked with watching crops or cattle have now been authorized to patrol rivers. They're unarmed, but they carry legal authority to report illegal nets, chemical dumping, or sabotage attempts. This isn't just ecosystem restoration. It's turning into local governance reform, built around natural resources. And yes, problems still exist. In the East, illegal gold mining is still polluting waterways. Some early hatchery projects failed due to poor training. And there are accusations, some credible, of local elites trying to monopolize fishing rights. But in terms of direction, the trajectory is clear. This model isn't retreating, it's expanding, and every step forward makes it harder to reverse. By mid-year, the story had outgrown Burkina Faso. Articles popped up in African Union policy journals, think tank reports, and regional media. One AU delegate referred to it as the Sahel's most radical domestic food policy since independence. A proposal, still in draft, circulated within the AU. Establish a cross-border aquatic recovery framework. Include freshwater protection in continental food security goals. Offer funding to replicate Burkina Faso's hatchery model in other member states. Some governments expressed interest, others didn't respond, and a few, privately, voiced concern. Because the more this idea spreads, the more existing powers lose leverage. In Brussels, several seafood lobby groups warned the EU Parliament that unregulated freshwater recovery movements in West Africa could disrupt current import pipelines. In Beijing, state-backed media began publishing quiet editorials emphasizing the risks of uncontrolled local aquaculture. China, remember, has large-scale fish export contracts across Africa. In Washington, little was said officially, but a senior analyst at USAID posted a 9-word tweet that made the rounds. If this model scales, we've lost the market. That's not noise. That's calculation. Back inside Burkina Faso, Traoré's tone hasn't changed. He doesn't brag. He doesn't over-explain. But his actions continue. 2 weeks ago, his office approved a new program linking river cooperatives with local microfinance banks, allowing villagers to borrow against future fish yields, like agriculture-backed credit but for rivers. One economist called it Wall Street but wet. Crude joke, but not inaccurate. This is not just aquaculture anymore. It's a new political operating system. One that says, control your food or someone else controls you. Whether it lasts or not, we don't know. Burkina Faso has a long way to go. The rivers could still collapse, politics could shift, external pressure could bite harder. But for now, it's working. And if this continues, then maybe one day, when a nation gets tired of waiting for food aid, it won't build more storage. It'll build hatcheries. And it won't call donors. It'll call the river.